Welcome back, capital F football fans, to the O&O Sports YouTube channel. Today we are looking back at yet another semi-nuclear week of college football. It was week 12 of the 2024 college football season. This has been one of the best seasons of college football. Just want to stop and say that for a second. So be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to get the latest news and analysis the rest of the way. And without further ado, let's jump right into our predictions from this past week. Now, if you have not heard, we are potentially giving away $100 to one of our subscribers. If you want a chance at winning, be sure to follow us on social media. Links to those will be in the description below. But that is only if we do not correctly predict over 75% of the college football games correctly this year. This week's games will be popping up on your screen right in front of your face, right before your eyes. And we ended up predicting a pretty decent 40 of the 55 total games correctly this week. And that brings us to 522 of 704 correct predictions on the year for a winning percentage of 74.1%. 1% overall. We are still just barely under that 75% threshold, so if you want a shot at that $100, be sure to follow us on our social medias. The links to those will be down below. Now, let's revisit our big impact matchups from this past week, starting with Tulane at Navy. We thought Tulane would win this one 37-34, and they actually shut the midshipmen out 35-0. We hit the nail on the head for Tulane here, but for Navy, not even close. They did not show up to this one at all. Before this game, we said Navy felt kind of like a poor man's army, but in this one, they looked more like a homeless man's army. They were outgained in this matchup 358 yards to 113, averaged 2.5 yards per play to Tulane's 5.8, went 1 of 11 on third down and gave the ball away twice. And those were especially bad for Navy because they were giving the ball away to your player of the game in this one, the quarterback Darian Minsoff for Tulane, who was essentially Tulane's entire offense in this matchup. He was killing the midshipmen all day, and he finished with 138 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air, with an additional 57 yards and another touchdown on the ground. And next, let's look at Texas at Arkansas. We thought Texas would win this one 35-20, and they ended up winning 20-10. This matchup was surprisingly a defensive masterclass from both sides. Both offenses were held to under 4.5 yards per play. Both had relatively inefficient days in every aspect, and that was because both teams were able to put pressure on each other's quarterbacks, Texas more so than Arkansas, and what do you know, Texas forces 2 turnovers and gets the W here. Not their best game by any means, but that defense is looking like it's in postseason form already. Gonna be a wild ride for the Longhorns this winter, but for your player of the game, it's going to be the defensive back, Jahdae Barron. He had 7 tackles in this one with a sack, an interception, and a pass defense. His presence was felt heavily in this one. And now let's look at Clemson at Pitt. We thought Clemson would win 28-21, and they did end up winning 24-20, and this was an absolutely awesome game. We got our typical woes from both sides in this one. This turned out to be a bit of a shootout by both quarterbacks, not necessarily in terms of points, but in the end, it was Cade Klubnik, the wonderkind, who put the Tigers on his back and scored on a 50-yard run in the final minutes to secure the victory here. But credit that Clemson defense, they've been the real deal this year, and they held Pitt to the field goal late that inevitably allowed Clemson to go ahead. That unit has been great this year, and they get the job done here. And for your player of the game, it has to go to Cade Klubnik. And Tony Williams also had an amazing day. We were considering him for your player of the game in this one. He had nearly 150 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. We want to give him a little bit of credit, but with that touchdown at the end, we feel like we had to give it to Klubnik. He also went 27-41 passing for 288 yards and 2 touchdowns, with 10 carries for 41 yards and that game-winning touchdown. And now let's jump to LSU at Florida. We thought Florida would win this one 31-30, and they did end up winning 27-16. First and foremost, what a great call by us. Let's pat ourselves on the back just for 1 second and say, we told you so. What can I say? But but all the credit in this one goes to DJ Lagway. He really stepped up and delivered some huge plays for the Gators, especially those 2 huge throws to Elijah Badger. That really opened this one up for Florida. But we can also give a ton of credit to that Gator defense here. They got a ton of pressure on Nussmeier, and they actually sacked him 7 times in this one. And it didn't matter that Florida only held the ball for 18 minutes of this game. They made the most out of their opportunities, especially the wide receiver that we talked about a second ago, who is your player of the game, Elijah Badger. He had 6 receptions for 131 yards and a touchdown. And now let's look at Missouri at South Carolina. We thought South Carolina would double Missouri's score 34-17 in this one, and it was actually really close. South Carolina does end up winning 34-30, and we will be the first to say we were completely wrong about Missouri here. They had their moments in this one, and they were very, very close to pulling this one out. We wrote them off completely before this matchup, so we will say to Missouri fans everywhere, my bad, that's on me. But that doesn't negate the fact that South Carolina just played that much better than you, especially the quarterback, your player of the game, Lenoris Sellers. He's really blossomed into an amazing talent for the Gamecocks, and when the offense wasn't having its best day, when Rocket Sanders only rushed for 2.8 yards per carry, when protections were breaking down, he put the team on his back and threw for over 350 yards and 5 touchdowns with an additional 45 yards on the ground, and he spread the ball around very well. All 5 of his touchdown passes were to different receivers. He sees the field so well, and that is why he's your player of the game in this one. And now for your final big impact matchup, it was Arizona State at Kansas State. We thought Kansas State would win this one 30-24, and Arizona State actually pulls it out 24-17. We were this close to sweeping our big impact predictions for the first time this year, but those dastardly Devils in Tempe, Arizona had other plans, and we were pretty on point with our prediction on Cam Scatabo. He didn't look fully healthy here, wasn't as explosive, didn't have a great game overall, but when he was down, it was his quarterback, Sam Leavitt, who picked him up and had a great day alongside that defense, who forced 3 turnovers and 2 picks off Avery Johnson. Wasn't the best game ever for Arizona State. Like we said, Cam Scatabo didn't have an amazing game, but it didn't have to be. He didn't have to have an amazing game, and they were just that much more efficient and a lot cleaner with the football, and they scratched together a W here with your player of the game being the quarterback, Sam Leavitt, who went 21 of 34 passing for 270 yards, 3 touchdowns with 5 additional carries for 42 rushing yards. And now let's look at your game of the week, Tennessee at Georgia. We thought Georgia would pull this one out 27-21, and they did end up winning 31-17. This one played out almost exactly how we predicted before this week. The Georgia front was able to contain, not stop, contain Dylan Sampson. He still had a great day. He's a great back, but he was contained just enough for the Volunteers not to be able to build a big lead early, and that allowed for Carson Beck to have his best game of the year. He looked phenomenal in this matchup, which makes us wonder, where has this Carson Beck been all year? This is who we thought we'd see coming into the year, and for some reason it took him until week 12 to get it going, which has to be infuriating for Tennessee fans, but I digress. The Bulldog defense comes up big like they did against Texas a few weeks ago and deliver Carson Beck a winnable game, which they do indeed take, and your player of the game is going to be Carson Beck. He went 25 of 40 passing for 347 yards and 2 touchdowns with 3 carries for 32 yards on the ground and an additional rushing touchdown. And now let's move on into your team and player of the week. As always, you guys vote on these. Be sure to hit the community tab after each week, and you get to vote on the team and player of the week that you see on this channel. This week, your team of the week is going to be the Florida Gators. They beat LSU 27-16, like we said. They logged 7 sacks on Nussmeier to LSU's whopping 0 on Lagway. They averaged 7.9 yards per play to LSU's 4.3, and they won the turnover battle 1-0. And this game may have single-handedly saved Billy Napier's job for another year, and in all honesty, he deserves it. Florida's been getting better and better each week. They've looked really good the past couple weeks, aside from that Texas game, but they get a crucial win here to put them at 500 on the season, and they are your team of the week this week. And for your player of the week, it's going to be the South Carolina quarterback, Lenoris Sellers. Nearly 400 total yards and 5 touchdowns. Like we said earlier, led a great comeback drive to win that game, and he has looked better and better each week. and he's only a red shirt freshman. We think he has a great career ahead of him. Shout out Lenore Sellers, he is our player of the week this week. And now let's move on to our Let's Talk About It segment, and this week we want to focus specifically on one conference, and that conference is the Big 12 and all the chaos going on around it. Boy, is that conference a mess, especially after the game we talked about earlier, Arizona State toppling Kansas State, who was ranked 16th before the week. We wouldn't necessarily consider that an upset. It was pretty close. The odds were pretty close, and we actually had Arizona State above the Wildcats in our rankings, but that's still a huge outcome in terms of Big 12 title implications. And an even bigger outcome in that same vein is BYU being upset by Kansas at home this week. In their second game in a row, the Jayhawks upset a top 12 team. This week it comes at the expense of the BYU Fighting Mormons, who received their first loss of the year. Kansas is looking like that conference's boogeyman this year, which is funny to say seeing as how poorly they started out. And now that conference is truly wide open for the taking. We've said that the past few weeks in the Big 12, but kind of assumed one of the teams in the championship game would be the Cougars. But now it truly is up in the air, and there are 4 or 5 teams that could fill out both spots in that title game, including but not limited to BYU, Arizona State, Kansas State still in the mix, Iowa State still in the mix, Colorado, yes, that Colorado, and maybe even a Baylor or a TCU could sneak in there if it gets truly chaotic, and anything is possible if 1 or 2 teams drop 1 or 2 games. That conference is a mess, but it is a beautiful mess. And to top it all off, or I guess bottom it all off, we have our 2 preseason conference title picks in Oklahoma State at 3-7 and Utah at 4-6. What a world we live in. And at this point, we're just going to step back and admire that conference for the train wreck that it is. And with that out of the way, let's jump right into the Week 13 Top 25. 3 teams dropped out this week. It was Louisville, who drops from 22, Washington State, who drops from 19, and LSU, who drops from 18. All 3 of these teams suffered big upset losses this week. Louisville lost to Stanford, Washington State loses to New Mexico, and LSU obviously loses to Florida. We considered keeping them in, but at 25, we have Memphis in favor of them. They sit at 9-2 on the year, coming off of a huge win over UAB, a bad UAB team, albeit. And after them, we have UNLV at 24, who's also having a great year, on the cusp of the Mountain West title game after a big win over San Diego State this week. After them, we have Syracuse jumping into our top 25 at 23, who sits at a modest 7-3 in the ACC, and we gave up on them a bit after ranking them earlier in the year, but they've been fighting back in that conference, and they've earned their way back into our top 25 with a win over Cal this week. Next, we have Iowa State jumping up 3 spots after they got a solid bounce back win over Cincinnati this week to push them to 5-2 in the conference and 8-2 overall. Still pretty good. Definitely not undefeated like they were a couple weeks ago, but still in the mix. And after them, we have Tulane jumping to 21 after that blowout win over a very decent Navy team. They're looking like one of the best teams out of the group of 5 this season, and we would have probably moved them up even more if not for Arizona State at 20, who jumps up 4 spots. They also drastically improved their resume this week after their win over Kansas State. They'll move up 4 spots, followed by Colorado at 19, who we only have moving up 1 spot following the win over Utah, because after them, we have South Carolina, who jumps up 2 spots. They had a big day and a big win over previously AP ranked and probably overrated Missouri. Good win nonetheless, and they'll be just behind Army, who stays put at 17, and they still sit atop the AAC at 9-0 on their bye week. After them, we have BYU dropping 6 spots to number 16 after their first loss of the season. They're dropping pretty far, but we feel justified with the spot because after them, we have Clemson jumping up a spot after their big win to keep the ACC title aspirations alive. But in their way stand the SMU Mustangs at 14 after their big win over Boston College to keep them undefeated in conference play. With Virginia and Cal left on their schedule, 2 winnable games should be interesting late for the Mustangs. And following them, we have Texas A&M jumping up a spot. They get a big win over New Mexico State, as to be expected. And after them, we have Miami jumping up a spot on their bye week. They're also in the mix for an ACC title appearance. It's really between them, Clemson, and SMU for those 2 coveted spots in Charlotte. It'll come down to the wire. But what didn't come down to the wire was the game involving your 11th ranked Tennessee Volunteers. They lose pretty badly to Georgia. They're still going to be in the mix, but they'll need to win out and have a couple teams ahead of them lose if they want to see the SEC ACC championship game. After them, we have Boise State jumping up 2 spots after yet another great win in that conference over a pretty solid San Jose State team, followed by Georgia jumping up to 9, which may seem low, but we try our best to value head-to-head matchups, and because of that, we cannot have them any higher because right above them at 8, we have Alabama. They get the win over the juggernaut FCS Mercer. I don't even know their mascot if I'm being honest. Bears? Bulls? I think it's Bears. But more importantly, they beat Georgia earlier in the year, so they'll move up a spot and stay up 1 spot above the Bulldogs, followed by Ole Miss, who's on a bye this week. They'll face the scary, spooky Florida Gators in Gainesville next week. But for the rest of our list, we have to issue a boring warning. I repeat, a boring warning. Sound the alarms. There is no movement the rest of the way. At 6, we have Penn State, who wins big over Purdue, followed by Indiana, who is on a bye. Then Notre Dame, who racks up another big win. They'll face Army next week in what should be an amazing matchup that could potentially decide both of those teams' postseason matchups, but we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves there. At 3, we have Texas, who gets the win over Arkansas, then Ohio State, who beats down Northwestern on Wrigley Field, and atop our list for the 5th straight week, we have Oregon, who narrowly escapes defeat over Wisconsin. Consider dropping them a spot this week in all honesty, but there's just no way. They're undefeated, they have a head-to-head win over Ohio State, and they have less losses than Texas, so again, they are your number 1 team this week. And now let's look at Todd's red carpet. This is our good buddy Todd's projected outlook on the playoff picture each week. As you can see, he is dressed for the occasion. Looking spiffy, Todd. Proud of you. And after the sun has set on a beautiful week 12 of the 2024 college football season, this is what the playoff bracket will look like according to Todd. And there are some big changes with just a few weeks before the 2024 postseason. Be sure to pause and soak it all in, or go down to our social media pages and check it out for yourself. And if you follow us there, you might win $100. Just saying. Links to those will be in the description. Let us know what you think. And as always, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe. And be sure to tune in later this week for our Week 13 preview. It's going to be a good one. Very important week of football. We will see you there.